Hey everybody, welcome on back. Last class, you looked at sort of the causes of the Protestant Reformation and kind of some background or context about what this time of questioning of authority was all about. And you kind of saw the idea of indulgences, and you saw sort of the discontent that was growing throughout Europe with regard to the actions of the Catholic Church. So today, you're going to be examining specifically how leaders of the Protestant Reformation criticized authority and some of the strategies and impacts of these leaders on the overall movement of sort of trying to clean up or purify or reform the Catholic Church. So just a couple of quick things of background to kind of get you going for today. So you remember about the Catholic Church sort of having essentially complete and total power throughout Europe in the Middle Ages, the post-classical era, and so on. So as the power and wealth of the church grew, so did the corruption of the clergy. Remember, clergy is just, leaders of the church. So think like bishops or priests or so on. So large sums of money were spent on lavish homes, fancy clothes, large banquets. So there were many people, not just within the clergy, but also parishioners throughout Europe, who felt like this money that was being given to the church, collected in the form of taxes from peasants, was not being spent properly, right? It was being spent on more worldly possessions rather than kind of advancing the goals of the Catholic Church. So two individuals that really spoke out against the corruption of the church were Martin Luther and John Calvin. Right? And just remember, please, this is something that I mention every year because this, happens very regularly. Martin Luther and Martin Luther King Jr. were not the same person, right? Martin Luther King Jr. was a famous American civil rights activist living in the 1900s, and he was named after Martin Luther. Right? But there's no relation, and there's no, they're not the same person. So just kind of keep that in mind. I know, it might sound funny that I have to say that, but you'd be very surprised. Every year that mix up is made. So I just want to make sure that we clarify that. So Martin Luther, he was a German monk. So he was somebody who, after a really severe lightning storm that he was kind of convinced he wouldn't make it through, he wouldn't survive. He said, if I make it through this, make it through the storm, I'm going to become a man of God, a priest or a monk. So, he entered a monastery in Germany, and he sort of gained a reputation for being somebody who's a little bit of a rebel. And he was really particularly offended by the selling of indulgences, those forgiveness of sins. So Martin Luther wrote a text called the 95 Theses. And this was written in 1517. And these were 95 formal statements that criticized the Catholic Church, specifically the selling of indulgences, the corruption that the Catholic Church was sort of perpetuating or that they were practicing. And legend has it that he nailed these 95 Theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg, Germany. And there's some historical debate over whether or not he actually did, actually physically nail his 95 Theses to the door of a church, but it makes for a good story. But needless to say, the church was not happy with being called out publicly by one of its own, by a monk, Martin Luther. So this is going to really mark the start of the Protestant Reformation. The 95 Theses are going to be printed using the printing press, right? That technology that you read about when you looked at the spread of Renaissance ideals. So the ideas of Martin Luther criticizing the church are going to spread far and wide throughout Europe. Many people are going to have access to this, many more people than previously would have, prior to the printing press, right? Because prior to the printing press, books, literature needed to be handwritten, which made it expensive, time-consuming, and just really difficult to mass produce. But the printing press is going to mass produce the ideas of Martin Luther, and we're going to start to see people get behind his cause, really start to be upset with the church for what they perceived as being the corrupt sale of indulgences and just corrupt practices in general. So for today, you're going to be looking at Martin Luther, John Calvin, and a couple of other leaders, and how their actions are going to really have a really large impact on religious unity throughout Europe and sort of breaking apart of the Catholic Church and really the future of Europe in terms of the religious landscape is going to be altered largely during this time period. Okay, so that you'll find this work right on in the same folder that you're in right now. That's 6.4. Good luck.